Unboxing. This is a everlasting wet palette from Redgrass Games. Full disclosure, I didn't pay for this, they sent me one. They asked me if I wanted to look at one and I said sure. Europe's currently on fire, why not have a wet palette? So let's try and get into this. Well, let's look at the box first, that's what you do, isn't it, in an unboxing. It's 15 by 20 centimeters, which is bigger than my makeshift wet palette over there. Compact and easy to carry. Note, if you carry your wet palette like this with paint in, it will all slosh to the bottom. This is the reason why you have a wet palette. This is just reasons to own a wet palette. Quick setup. Put foam in bottom. Add water till wet. Do not add too much water. Put hydration paper sheet, so that's basically a bit like a paper towel. Okay. Then remove air bubbles. That should be flat. Add paint on top of paper. So this is your palette-y bit. This is very boring. Okay. Let's look at the stuff. Now, I saw most of this was from Kickstarter from a while ago. They now sell them regularly, and at the time I was like, who would spend that much on a wet palette? You can make one out of a piece of Tupperware. And I've got a video there showing you exactly how to do that. Box is gone. We get 50 hydration paper sheets. So this is where they get you. Every time you change the paper in your wet palette, you'll use one of these up. I change the paper twice a week, thereabouts. Once a week. So this might last me best part of a year, in theory. Look at that reflection, very shiny. For acrylic paints only, well, yeah. The question is, will I need refills? I'll only know that after a longer review, which I'll be doing in the future after I've used this for a few weeks. So, apologies to headphone users. Okay. Pull everything out. I have heard various complaints on the internet, don't need that these magnets here, this is a little regular plastic palette. Get the noisy stuff out of the way first. But these magnets on either this thing or on the actual palette itself aren't necessarily glued in, but that doesn't seem to be a problem on mine. Let's find out. Clonk. Nope, seems to be fine on my one. So maybe that was just some of the earlier production models. You can also put it there if you want. If you're a long ways person, if you're a tall ways person, there, long ways, there. I may never use that. This is the Springer for springing your wet palette to keep the lid on. I guess that's the only thing making it airtight. Oh no, that's a pretty good seal. Got a rubber lining around here. So that should help keep it airtight, and a bobbly texture on the inside of the plastic. So this is basically just two pieces of plastic and some rubber. So that's our paper. Oh wait, haha! We have 100 sheets of paper, not 50. Well, this will easily last me a year before refilling. I don't know how much it costs. I'll put it on the screen there for how much refills cost. So this is some pads, long-lasting, naturally mold-resistant, neutral grey. Okay, let's get one of these open. I've got some moisture inside here. That's a bit concerning. If it's mold-resistant, there shouldn't be anything breathing inside there. This might need scissors. I'm in. Okay, so we've got this one and a replacement, so that would be Floop in there. It's quite spongy. It does already feel wet, which isn't good. I'm going to ask an expert. The expert says this is not a problem. It's probably just a result of the treatment process to make this antifungal, because there's no such thing as a naturally fungus-resistant foam. You have to treat it with something. And it does smell a bit chemically. So whatever the manufacturing process is, it imbues it with some moisture, which in this heat has no doubt evaporated and condensed on the inside of the packet. So I turned it this way up because there's a watermark here. Don't know if you can see that. And that's going to create a divot that I don't want the thing. So watermark down is my plan. And then all of these sheets. This bag is resealable. That's good. And then you put that on there. Okay, I will fill this with some water and come back. Okay, it's nice and wet now. The water, it really does suck up the water really nicely. I had to fill it and then squeeze it out a couple of times not to get it to really want to suck up all the water. But that is some very absorbent foam. So already it's got an advantage over the piece of pluck foam I was using in my homemade wet palette. So let's take this and we'll lay our piece of paper on the wet palette. Get rid of the air bubbles. Now, you're not supposed to do anything to the paper apparently, just lay it on top. Sometimes some wet palette brands say that you need to treat their paper, you need to like put it in hot water and then let it dry out again afterwards, but this, no, none of that. Okay, so that's it, that's how you set it up. Let's put some paint on it. Let's put something on it from a dropper bottle because that will be easiest. Let's use some of my Deathwatch black because it happens to be nearby. And also, I'm inevitably going to use this to paint some Deathwatch. It's not seeping into the paper. That's a good start. So, well, that's indeed a wet palette. Alright. I'll have to use this for a little bit, paint some stuff with it, and then see how it works, but yeah. Full review will be later in a week. This will just be a short first impressions in this video. Seeping through a little bit. That's probably inevitable. I read online that it's quite likely that it will stain the sponge that's underneath, but my existing wet palette sponge has been stained a lot and it's never affected the actual paint on the top of the paper. So I'm just going to seal this up and I'm going to go find something to paint. It's the other way around for that. I think I'm a long ways boy, tall boy here. like that. Yes, that probably suits me best. Yeah. So yes, for you it's a jump cut. For me, it'll be several hours later. Okay, it's a couple of days later, and I haven't opened this in 2 days since I did some painting on my little commissar here. So that's not in focus. It won't be. So I just did some very basic painting on this guy. So let's have a look inside. Well, this is kind of to be expected. Zoom in a bit. The paint has separated because this is just a wet palette. It's not magic. Paint always separates on wet palettes when you leave it over time, and if you do this and put the paints too close to each other, they can merge. So this has gone all sorts of wrong. But this is normal. This happened on my normal wet palette. This happens to every wet palette. If you don't think this is going to happen, then you're deluding yourself. So there's nothing special about this wet palette that prevents this from happening. Physics is physics. So the paint is still wet though. So these were some glazes, and these are still very wet over here, which is good. Normally on my old wet palette made out of Tupperware, this would have dried out a little bit and might not be quite as wet, so it's retaining its moisture quite well. And what about these ones over here? Still wet. But still wet pretty much everywhere. Which is good. What about this one? This one was actually starting to dry out on the paper. It's actually now rehydrated. A bit thinner than it was when I closed the lid, but that's kind of to be expected. So in conclusion, this is definitely a wet palette. It does everything a wet palette should do. It's nice and shallow, which is good. It's an advantage over my Tupperware version. I've not used the wavy thing over here yet, but I don't use washes much or inks when I'm brush painting. The big question then is this worth the price? I looked it up. I think this painter's bundle is €36 and some cents. And for that you get the wet palette itself, 2 foam sponges, 100 hydration sheets, and one of these wavies. Now if you take all of those bits individually, it's a great deal, but the fact is that a pack of 50 hydration sheets is €10. That's a lot of money for basically tracing paper. Well, it's not tracing paper. But it's good. The paper is very good. It doesn't seem to curl as much as the baking parchment I use. I use Bako foil baking parchment in my wet palette. So I'll say this, the paper is good, but it all comes down to how often you change that paper. If you change that paper every single day, then you're going to be going through a pack of these hydration sheets, every 2 months or thereabouts. If you only change your paper once a week, then it's not a big deal. It's €10 a year. It's not a problem whatsoever. But if you're painting a lot, this is not necessarily worth it for the paper refills. The sponges will probably last you a very long time. I don't see any reason to need to replace those unless you damage them. And they shouldn't go mouldy, because apparently they have integral anti-mold, antifungal properties. So there's that. It really comes down to, the bundle is worth it. Yes, you get a decent wet palette tray. The hydration sheets are good. The sponge is very good. The sponge just sucks up water. It loves it. Much better than the homemade foam I've been using. But the question is the hydration sheet refills, and I don't know how to really quantify that, because it entirely depends upon how often you're going to replace them. For me, once I run out of these, I probably won't replace them, and I'll just start using baking parchment back on the surface of this and see how it goes. And what I might do is, once I've finished with this sheet, I'll put some baking parchment on, test it to see how it behaves on top of this sponge. Because if it turns out that the paper isn't actually that special, and all of the real work is being done by that sponge underneath it, then it changes things a lot. So that's my first impressions. It's a good wet palette. I am going to be using this instead of my homemade version, but I didn't have to pay for this. So €36 for a wet palette with all of those hydration sheets with it. I don't know, a roll of baking parchment costs like £1 and lasts me months. So it's really hard to say at this point whether that is a false economy or not. But certainly it's an improvement over my current homemade version, and I've had no problems with these magnets on the sides here coming off or anything like that. And it definitely retains its moisture very, very well. I haven't even been putting the little strap on. I've just been putting the lid on, and between the lid and its little rubber seal there, it's been holding all the moisture in, and it's been 25, 26 degrees in this flat most of the last few days during this heat wave, so it's absolutely doing everything that you would expect a wet palette to do. And that's it, that's my first impressions. I'll be back with a full review once I've used this for a few weeks, maybe a month. Let you know how frequently I am changing my paper. I don't suspect I paint more frequently than everyone else watching this channel. I only have to paint like on weekends, really. So, yeah. Full review coming in about a month. Current review, yes, the bundle's good. Don't know if the paper's worth it. So, that's it. If you liked this video, please like, share and subscribe. Click the bell for notifications. There is a Patreon, which you can go and support me with donations for that, and there are all sorts of rewards. And yeah, that's it. This is a wet palette. It does everything you expect a wet palette to do. That's it, yeah. Bye now.